What happens when a country music superstar walks into daytime, television's most unpredictable hot seat, and finds himself facing off against one of Hollywood's most formidable personalities? The answer is a television moment so explosive, unexpected that it left audiences stunned and the entertainment world buzzing for weeks. This is the story of how Blake Shelton's appearance on The View turned into a verbal battleground that ended with Whoopi Goldberg doing something she had never done before in her years of hosting: physically removing a guest from the show. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think really happened here. Now, let's get into the drama that unfolded live on television. The studio audience was buzzing with excitement as Blake Shelton made his way to the iconic View table. He was there to promote his latest album. But what started as a routine promotional appearance quickly transformed into something far more intense. Whoopi Goldberg, known for her no-nonsense approach and sharp wit, welcomed him with what seemed like genuine warmth. "Blake Shelton, welcome to The View," Whoopi said, her signature smile spreading across her face. "Thanks for joining us today. I have to say your new album has been getting a lot of attention." Blake settled into his chair, that familiar Oklahoma charm evident in his relaxed posture. "Well, thank you, Whoopi. Always a pleasure to be here with you ladies, though I have to admit I'm a little nervous sitting at this table. Y'all have a reputation for asking the tough questions." The audience chuckled, and for a moment it seemed like this would be just another pleasant celebrity interview. Joy B jumped in with her usual playful energy. "Oh, don't worry, Blake. We'll go easy on you. We know you're just a simple country boy." But there was something in Joy's tone, a subtle edge that Blake seemed to pick up on. His smile tightened just slightly. "Simple country boy, huh? Well, I suppose that's one way to put it." Whoopi leaned forward, her expression shifting to something more serious. "Blake, your music has always been about traditional values, small-town life. That sort of thing. But we're living in changing times. How do you reconcile some of those traditional messages with the realities of modern America?" Blake paused, clearly considering his words carefully. "You know, Whoopi, I think there's room for all kinds of perspectives in this country. My music comes from my experiences growing up in Oklahoma, the values I was raised with. That doesn't mean I think everyone has to live the same way I do. But your lyrics," Sonny host interjected, "they often paint a very specific picture of what American life should look like. Some people might say that's a bit narrow-minded." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop a few degrees. Blake's jaw tightened, and the easygoing demeanor he had walked in with began to shift. "I'm sorry, narrow-minded. I write about what I know, what I've lived. Is that somehow wrong now?" Whoopi raised her hand, trying to maintain control of the conversation. "Nobody's saying it's wrong, Blake. We're just trying to understand your perspective. But surely you can see how some of your songs might not resonate with everyone." "Of course, they don't resonate with everyone," Blake shot back, his voice rising slightly. "No music does, but I'm not trying to please everyone. I'm trying to be authentic to who I am and where I come from." The tension was becoming palpable. The audience, which had been relaxed and cheerful moments before, was now sitting in uncomfortable silence. Sarah N. tried to lighten the mood. "Blake, let's talk about your time on The Voice. That show brings together artists from all different backgrounds." But Blake wasn't ready to let the previous line of questioning go. "You know what? Let me ask you something," he said, turning back to Whoopi. "Why is it that when someone like me talks about traditional values, about faith, about family, suddenly I'm narrow-minded? But when other artists talk about their experiences, their values, that's celebrated as authentic and brave?" Whoopi's eyebrows raised. "Blake, I think you might be misunderstanding what we're trying to discuss here." "Am I though?" Blake pressed on, his Oklahoma accent becoming more pronounced as his emotions heightened. "Because it sure feels like there's a double standard here. I come from a place where people work hard, believe in God, love their families, and try to do right by their neighbors. Since when did that become something to apologize for?" The studio had gone completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut away. Whoopi's expression had hardened considerably. "Nobody asked you to apologize for anything," she said, her voice carrying that unmistakable edge that regular View watchers knew meant trouble. "But you can't expect to come on national television and not have your perspectives questioned." "Questioned is one thing," Blake replied, his voice now carrying a heat that matched Whoopi's. "But what I'm hearing sounds more like an attack on an entire way of life that millions of Americans relate to." Joy tried to jump in. "Blake, I think you're being a little sensitive here. Sensitive? Blake turned to her incredulous. I'm being sensitive for defending my beliefs and the beliefs of the people who support my music. Whoopi slammed her hand on the table, the sound echoing through the studio like a gunshot. Hold up. Hold up right there. You came on our show. Blake, this is our house. And in our house, we have respectful conversations. Respectful. Blake laughed, but there was no humor in it. You call what just happened respectful? You ladies invited me here under the pretense of talking about my music, and instead I'm getting lectured about how my values are supposedly problematic. The audience was completely captivated now, some leaning forward in their seats, others covering their mouths in shock. This was unlike anything they had ever seen on The View before. Whoopi stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. Blake, I think you need to check your attitude. We ask tough questions of everyone who sits at this table. That's what we do, and I'm answering them, Blake said, also rising from his seat. But I'm not going to sit here and be told that the values I was raised with, the values that shaped me into the man I am today, are somehow wrong or outdated. Nobody said they were wrong, Sonny tried to interject. But both Blake and Whoopi were now locked in their confrontation. The rest of the panel forgotten. Then what exactly are you saying? Blake demanded, his voice echoing through the studio. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're trying to paint me and people like me as some kind of problem that needs to be fixed. Whoopi's eyes flashed dangerously. What I'm saying, Blake, is that you need to understand that your way of life isn't the only way of life, and your values aren't the only values that matter in this country. I never said they were, Blake exploded. But they do matter. They matter to me. They matter to my fans. And they have every right to exist alongside everyone else's values. That's what America is supposed to be about, isn't it? Freedom to believe what you want to believe. The confrontation had reached a boiling point that no one in the studio, least of all the producers, frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, had anticipated. The silence that followed Blake's passionate declaration was deafening. You could feel the electricity in the air as Whoopi stared him down, her jaw clenched tight. The other hosts sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this unprecedented moment play out. Freedom to believe what you want, Whoopi repeated slowly, her voice dripping with barely controlled anger. That's rich coming from someone whose fan base regularly shows up to concerts, waving flags that represent division and exclusion. Blake's face flushed red. Now, hold on just 1 minute. You don't get to generalize about my fans like that. You don't know these people. They're good, hard-working Americans who deserve better than to be stereotyped by someone who's never even met them. I know enough. Whoopi fired back, taking a step closer to where Blake was standing. I know what I see at your concerts, what I hear in your interviews, what your music represents to certain groups of people, what my music represents. Blake's voice was incredulous. My music represents love, family, working hard for what you have, and being proud of where you come from. If that somehow threatens you, that says more about you than it does about me. Joy tried desperately to regain control. Okay, everyone, let's just take a breath here. And no, Blake cut her off, his eyes never leaving Whoopi. I want to hear this. I want to hear exactly what Whoopi thinks is so wrong with singing about small towns and traditional values. Whoopi crossed her arms, her posture radiating defiance. What's wrong is when those so-called traditional values are used as code words for keeping other people down, for maintaining systems that hurt marginalized communities. The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row had their hands over their mouths in shock. This was not the polite celebrity interview anyone had expected. Blake shook his head in disbelief. Code words? Are you serious right now? When I sing about loving your neighbor, about working hard, about faith and family, those are code words for oppression. Do you hear yourself? I hear you perfectly clear. Whoopi shot back. And I hear the dog whistles in your music. The subtle messages that tell certain people they're more American than others. Dog whistles. Blake's voice cracked with emotion. You're calling my music racist? Is that what you're doing here? You're going to sit there and accuse me of being a racist on national television? The studio was in complete chaos now. The audience was buzzing with whispered conversations. Some people standing up to get a better view of the confrontation. Behind the cameras, producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial. If the shoe fits, Whoopi said coldly, and the studio went dead silent again. Blake stared at her for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but intense. That is the most insulting, ignorant thing anyone has ever said to me. You don't know me. You don't know my heart. You don't know the work I've done, the people I've helped, the communities I've supported. Then tell us, Sarah Ann said quickly, sensing an opportunity to de-escalate. Tell us about that work. But Blake was beyond escalation. Now, why should I have to defend myself against baseless accusations? Why should I have to prove I'm not a racist to people who made up their minds about me before I even walked in here? Whoopi leaned forward, her voice rising. Because your platform reaches millions of people, Blake, your voice has power. And when you use that power to promote divisive messages wrapped up in pretty melodies and folksy charm, you need to be held accountable. Divisive messages. Blake was shouting now. What's divisive about loving your country? What's divisive about believing in hard work and personal responsibility? What's divisive about thinking that people should be judged by their character and not their politics? Everything is political. Blake Whoopi shouted back. Your music, your image, your whole brand is built on appealing to people who want to go back to a time when things were supposedly simpler, supposedly better. But better for who? Better for everyone who was willing to work for it. Blake fired back. Better for people who believed in building something instead of tearing everything down. The two were now standing face to face, separated only by the width of the table. The other hosts had backed away slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the level of hostility that had erupted. You think I'm tearing things down? Whoopi's voice was dangerous now. I'm trying to build a world where everyone has a voice, where everyone matters, where your narrow definition of American values doesn't get to silence everyone else. My narrow definition, Blake laughed bitterly. The only person trying to silence anyone here is you. You invited me on your show just so you could ambush me with your political agenda. Political agenda? Whoopi slammed her hand on the table again, harder this time. My agenda is equality, justice, and making sure that people like you don't get to hide behind your guitar and your charm while promoting ideas that hurt real people. People like me, Blake repeated slowly. There it is. People like me. You mean white people from the South. You mean Christians. You mean conservatives. Just say it, Whoopi. Say what you really think. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Whoopi's eyes flashed. Dangerously, and for a moment it seemed like she might explode completely. What I think, she said, her voice low and controlled, is that you came on my show with an attitude. You've been disrespectful to me and my colleagues, and you're trying to play the victim when someone finally calls you out on your nonsense. Calls me out on what? Blake demanded. On being proud of where I come from. On writing music that connects with people who feel like their voices don't matter anymore. On refusing to apologize for believing in something bigger than myself. On being a fraud, Whoopi said quietly, and the words hit Blake like a physical blow. He stared at her, his face going pale. A fraud. That's right, Whoopi continued, her confidence building. You sell this image of being this authentic country boy, this voice of the people, but you're just another celebrity millionaire living in a bubble, telling people what you think they want to hear. Blake's hands were shaking now. Whether from anger or hurt, it was impossible to tell. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Whoopi pressed on relentlessly. When was the last time you actually lived in one of those small towns you sing about? When was the last time you worked a real job? Struggled to pay bills? Worried about putting food on the table? You're singing about a life you haven't lived in decades, if you ever lived it at all. The attack was personal. Now, cutting deep into Blake's identity as an artist and as a person, the audience watched in stunned silence as one of country music's biggest stars stood there, clearly wounded by the verbal assault. That's enough, Blake said quietly, his voice barely audible. That's more than enough, but Whoopi wasn't finished. You want to talk about authenticity? Let's talk about how you use your platform to make working. Class people think you understand their struggles while you count your millions and live in your mansion. Blake turned away from her, then turned back, his eyes blazing. You know what, Whoopi? You're absolutely right about one thing. I am a millionaire. I am successful. And you know why? Because I worked for it. Because I believed in myself when nobody else did. Because I didn't let people like you convince me that I wasn't good enough. That my dreams didn't matter. People like me. Now it was Whoopi's turn to look offended. People who think they get to decide who's authentic and who's not. People who think they get to judge someone's entire life based on their own prejudices and assumptions. Blake's voice was building to a crescendo. You talk about equality and justice, but you're the most judgmental person I've ever met. The confrontation had reached a level of intensity that nobody in the studio had ever witnessed. Both Blake and Whoopi were breathing heavily, their faces flushed with anger and adrenaline. The other hosts looked like they wanted to disappear completely. The studio felt like a powder keg, ready to explode. Both Blake and Whoopi were staring each other down, the air between them crackling with unresolved tension. The audience was completely captivated. Some people literally on the edge of their seats watching this unprecedented confrontation unfold. The most judgmental person you've ever met will be repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. That's what you think of me. Blake nodded firmly. That's exactly what I think. You invited me here under false pretenses, attacked my character, my fans, my music, and my entire way of life. All because I don't fit into your narrow little box of what an acceptable celebrity should be. Narrow little box. Whoopi's voice was rising again. I've spent my entire career fighting against narrow little boxers. I've broken barriers that people like you didn't even know existed. People like me. Again, Blake said, shaking his head. You keep saying that. People like me. What exactly do you mean by that, Whoopi? Say it clearly so everyone watching can understand exactly what you think of people like me. The challenge hung in the air. Whoopi looked around the studio, suddenly aware that every camera was focused on her, that millions of people were watching this moment. But she was too far gone to back down now. Fine, she said, stepping even closer to Blake. People like you are the problem with this country. People who think their way of life is under attack when really they're just being asked to share the spotlight. People who wrap themselves in the flag and claim to represent real America while ignoring everyone who doesn't look like them or think like them. Blake's jaw dropped. Are you listening to yourself? You're literally proving my point. You're standing there making sweeping generalizations about millions of Americans based on nothing but your own prejudices. My prejudices? Whoopi laughed harshly. That's rich coming from someone whose entire career is built on appealing to people's worst instincts. Worst instincts. Blake was incredulous. Love of family is a worst instinct. Pride in your community is a worst instinct. Believing in hard work and personal responsibility are worst instincts when they're used as weapons against other people. Yes, Whoopi shouted. When they're used to justify treating other Americans as second-class citizens. Yes. Blake took a step back, his face flushing with anger and hurt. You don't know what you're talking about. You've never been to the communities I come from. You've never met the people who listen to my music. You're just spouting talking points and stereotypes. I know enough. Whoopi shot back. I know what I see. I know what your music represents to certain groups of people. What it represents to certain groups of people. Blake repeated slowly. Do you hear yourself? You're judging my entire life's work based on what you think other people might think about it. That's not my responsibility. Joy tried once more to intervene. Maybe we should take a commercial break. And no, Blake cut her off firmly. I want to finish this. I want everyone watching to see exactly what happens when someone tries to have an honest conversation about their beliefs on this show. Crossed her arms defiantly. Honest conversation. You've been defensive and hostile from the moment we started asking real questions. Real questions. Blake's voice cracked with emotion. You called me a racist, a fraud, and basically said, I'm everything wrong with America. Those aren't questions, those are attacks. If you can't handle having your beliefs challenged, maybe you shouldn't be in the public eye, Whoopi said coldly. Blake stared at her for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was quiet but intense. My beliefs aren't the problem here, Whoopi. Your inability to respect anyone who thinks differently than you do is the problem. Respect, Whoopi's voice was getting louder again. Respect is earned, Blake. And you haven't done anything today to earn mine, and you've done everything possible to lose mine, Blake fired back. You've been condescending, judgmental, and flat-out mean. Is this how you treat everyone who doesn't agree with your politics? This isn't about politics, insisted. This is about basic human decency. Blake laughed bitterly. Human decency? You've spent the last 20 minutes attacking me personally, questioning my character, and insulting my fans. Where's the human decency in that? The confrontation had reached a level that even the View's producers had never anticipated. Behind the cameras, stage managers were frantically trying to figure out how to handle the situation. Whoopi suddenly straightened up, her expression changing to something even more dangerous. You know what, Blake? I think this interview is over. Fine by me, Blake said immediately. I never should have come here in the first place. No, you shouldn't have, Whoopi agreed. And since this is my show, I'm going to help you find your way out. Blake looked confused. What's that supposed to mean? Without warning, Whoopi walked around the table toward Blake. The audience gasped, audibly sensing that something unprecedented was about to happen. "It means," Whoopi said as she approached him, "that I'm done with this conversation. I'm done with your attitude, and I'm done with having you on my stage." Blake backed away slightly. "Whoopi, what are you doing?" "What I should have done 10 minutes ago," she replied, reaching for his arm. "Don't touch me," Blake said firmly, pulling his arm away. "Then leave," Whoopi shot back. "Get off my stage. Get out of my studio and don't come back." "I'm going," Blake said, but apparently not. Fast enough for Whoopi's liking. She grabbed his arm again, more firmly this time. "No, you're not just going. You're leaving right now." Blake tried to pull away again. "Get your hands off me, Whoopi. This is assault. This is me removing a disruptive guest from my show," Whoopi replied, her grip tightening. The other hosts were on their feet now. Joy and Sarah both calling out for them to stop, but neither Blake nor Whoopi was listening. The audience was in complete chaos. Some people standing up, others gasping and pointing. "I said, don't touch me," Blake repeated, his voice rising. "And I said, get out," Whoopi replied, now physically pushing him toward the exit. Blake stumbled slightly, but regained his balance. "This is insane. You can't just put your hands on people because you don't like what they're saying." "Watch me," Whoopi said grimly, continuing to push him toward the backstage area. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of this unprecedented scene. Blake was being physically removed from the view by Whoopi Goldberg herself, something that had never happened in the show's long history. "This is going to be all over the news," Blake called out as Whoopi continued to push him toward the exit. "Everyone's going to see how you really treat people who disagree with you." "Good," Whoopi replied without hesitation. "Let them see. Let them see what happens when someone comes on my show and disrespects me, my colleagues, and everything we stand for. I disrespected you." Blake was incredulous even as he was being pushed away. "You're the one who started this whole thing. You're the one who turned a simple interview into a political attack. And you're the one who couldn't handle having your precious beliefs questioned." Whoopi shot back, giving him one final push toward the backstage area. Blake caught himself against the wall, turning back to face her one last time. "You know what, Whoopi? You just proved everything I said about you was right. You talk about tolerance and acceptance. But the moment someone thinks differently than you do, this is how you react." "Get out," Whoopi said firmly, pointing toward the exit. "Get out of my studio and don't come back." Blake straightened his shirt and looked around the studio one more time. "I don't want to come back. This place is toxic." And with that, he walked through the backstage exit, leaving Whoopi standing alone in front of a completely stunned studio audience. The silence that followed was deafening. Whoopi stood there for a moment, breathing heavily before slowly walking back to the table where her shocked co-hosts were waiting. "Well," she said, settling back into her chair as if nothing had happened. "I think that's enough excitement for one day." The audience remained silent, unsure whether to applaud or simply sit in stunned disbelief at what they had just witnessed. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of this historic television moment that would be talked about for years to come. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Was Whoopi justified in physically removing Blake from the show, or did she cross a line that should never be crossed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. Which side do you think was right in this heated battle?